video games. We have a great panel, but before we get started, a couple announcements. Thank you for joining. For those of you that aren't yet members of the Sports Lawyers Association, please visit our website, sportslaw.org, and become a member. A lot of benefits behind our paywall and terrific information to help you in your practice. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Patrick Reilly, who will be moderating today's webinar. And thank you all for joining. And again, any questions, always reach out to us on our website. Thank you very much for attending today.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Bobby. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Patrick Reilly. I'm a partner at a law firm called Faegre Drinker. I'm located in Indianapolis, and I head our firm's sports and gaming practice. But you all didn't tune in to hear me today. I want to get you over to our panelists here today. I thought that I'd introduce them as far as their names and their titles, and then have them introduce themselves. And then we can kind of get into afterward kind of, you know, how they got to the position that they're in, their background, et cetera. So we've got Dave Murphy with us, who's Senior Corporate Counsel from Sony Interactive Entertainment, also known as PlayStation. Roger Quiles from Quiles Law. We've got Harris Peskin, who's a partner at ESG Law. And we've got Aalok Sharma, who's a partner at Stinson LLP. So in my order, I've got Roger. Do you mind just kind of kicking us off, and then we'll go to Dave and Aalok and Peskin. And again, really here, I just want to hear about, you know, what do you do and kind of how did you get there, so to speak?
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Roger Quiles. I'm the founding partner of Quiles Law. We service the esports and gaming industry exclusively. Whether it's talent side, company side, team side, we take a 360 degree approach to the space, servicing an international clientele on all sides. So any given day, that work's going to involve some back-end corporate, commercial contracts, M&A, certainly a lot of IP, effectively it's probably most akin to outside GC work. To the corporate clients, and probably closest to independent entertainment clientele on the player and creator side of things. So that's the 30-second version of it all. Okay, cool. Dave, what about you?
Thanks, Patrick, and thanks to the SLA for having me. So I work at PlayStation. My job is to support our PlayStation studios, so the studios that make exclusive content for the platform. That includes our San Diego studio, which for SLA members is our studio that makes MLB The Show, our baseball game. So that's my intersection between games and sports. I also support a couple of our other first-party studios. I support our PC and mobile groups. I support our XDev group, which is also it's our version of the second party, so the group that makes deals with independent studios for exclusive content for the platform, and some other of our service groups like motion capture and animation and IT and QA. I have sort of an unconventional background. I started my own practice out of law school, focusing on entertainment transactions, and ended up just doing a lot of video game work because I live in the Bay Area, and that was the biggest growth industry in my area. From there, I went in-house after a couple of years and worked for a mobile game company called Kabam. And I was there for a few years until they got acquired. Then I transitioned to PlayStation. I've been at PlayStation for 5 years.
Okay, cool. I can't remember if I had Harris or Aalok next, but why don't we go Aalok and then Harris?
All right, thanks. Thanks again for the SLA for having me, Patrick. Thanks for having me, and really excited to talk to all of you. I'm in private practice. I'm a partner here at Stinson. I'm based in our Minneapolis office. And I also, sort of like Patrick, I'm one of the chairs of our sports practices, but my practice is a little unique. I really focus more on emerging sports and entertainment, sports tech. So a little atypical from what you think of a traditional sports lawyer. When it comes to the video gaming space, we're sort of all over the place. We do work with publishers. and we do handle a number of their matters, from IP matters to sort of, M&A, due diligence, corporate work. A lot of my practice in this space really sort of mimics what I think what Harris and Roger will do, which is we work with a lot of organizations, but more so on the investor side. So we typically represent high net worth individuals or institutional investors, locate and identify properties that may make sense for them. And we help them do the due diligence on whether these investments are good and what are some things to look for. We provide advice and counseling on a lot of the new, unique things that we will talk about today. Some of these are really, really emerging issues, and not a lot of legal or regulatory guidance on there. So try to do whatever we can do to mitigate risk. So that is typically my experience in the video games, esports, emerging entertainment space, sports entertainment space.
Great, thanks, Aalok. Okay, Harris, what about you?
Thanks for the SLA for having me on. It's a pleasure again to be here. I think Aalok and I did this last year as well. It was in the gambling panel that we did. And I think I've been doing this since 2017. So it's been a while now, and a pleasure as always. My name is Harris Peskin. I'm a partner at ESG Law. At ESG, we represent all kinds of esports organizations, like Aalok was just mentioning, and similar to how Roger operates. We work with some of the biggest esports organizations, kind of like an outside general counsel capacity. TSM, Cloud9, Team Liquid, Evil Geniuses, all those guys, they're our client base. We work with most of the tier 1 esports teams in the LCS and Overwatch League and Call of Duty League. My role as counsel on a daily basis involves anything from working with those leagues, which are really just arms of, I guess, developers, like Riot Games, for instance, might spin off or might create a league like the LCS, right? Our role would be, or my role would be, to negotiate with Riot on terms favorable for the governance of that league, our participation in that league, and that will involve everything from, licensing to, revenue share rights and all kinds of, the saleability of that kind of slot, stuff like that. That's stuff that I've played a fairly large role in over the course of my tenure at ESG, dating all the way back to 2016, actually, when I was fairly involved in assisting the LEC, which was the European League of Legends scene, in basically reformatting, or I guess reorganizing to moving away from a relegation-based league into one with revenue sharing and some form of governance rights. My background, I'm a huge gamer. I've played World of Warcraft my entire life, and I always like to lead with that, just to kind of give people some sort of knowledge as to who I am. And other than that, I would say that really on the corporate side, we do a lot of M&A work with these teams, especially recently with respect to financing and having to do with all things associated with sale of potential slots, acquisition of potential slots, sale of players, and the like.
Oh, great. Thanks, Harris. Okay, so before I get to my next question, I probably should have mentioned this at the outset. This won't be anything new for any of those who have attended virtual panels before, but right, we've got this Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and to the extent you guys have questions that want our panelists to answer, please type them in down below, recognizing that, some questions they may not be able to answer, as part of their daily work or some of the clients, internal, external, that they represent. So, some of you guys have kind of touched on this already, your background and kind of how you got into this role. But I guess for this next question, I'm interested in A, again, kind of your background, how you got into the role, if you haven't already covered it, and B, really taking us kind of a peek behind the curtain, of what is your schedule like, if that's even possible to kind of, quantify. Like if you're a week-to-week basis or a day-to-day basis, or maybe if you look over your past month or 2 months, what's been your schedule like for that? So Harris, why don't we start with you, if that's okay, and then we'll go kind of in reverse order with Aalok and Dave and then Roger. So I think you may be on mute, although for some reason
No. You should be able to hear me. Sorry about that. I said, since Roger was added to this panel, my background is a little bit more interesting. I can vividly recall having a coffee with Roger in 2013, 2014 to talk about
thereabouts, yeah.
to talk about esports. Mm-hmm. No, I think that my entry into the space was around 2015. I was fresh out of law school, and I wrote a couple of papers that attracted the attention of a partner at a law firm I was working at the time. Got him interested in potentially investing in a team, and while I was at the law firm, he ended up becoming so interested that he asked me to broker an acquisition. I went ahead and found some teams in the European League of Legends scene, which were selling their slot. And I ended up working for that company for some period of time. I moved out of the law firm I was at. I moved to Germany. And then I ended up working in Germany for a little while as the COO of that team. And while I was there, I got very close with some of the other team owners who really were just a bunch of kids at the time. Didn't really have much legal counsel. It was all the way back in 2015. So it was kind of still a bit more like the Wild Wild West. And I essentially helped lead a group of these team owners in negotiations against Riot Games. And that was when we kind of proposed doing away with the relegation structure, increasing revenue share rights, and all kinds of other things. And being in that position allowed me to kind of transition away from that team eventually to my own law firm, where I helped file one of the first ever EB1A visas. And then eventually beyond that, I ended up merging my practice, which I created after that team, with Bryce Blum, who was at the time one of the other big esports attorneys in North America. And that's kind of how we founded ESG. Since then, I've tried to give back to the community. I've also helped form the Esports Bar Association, which I am an executive director at. I'm also on the board of directors, and we've done some work with the SLA there as well. And I think that generally speaking, I've kind of had this really strange background where I went from working as a corporate lawyer to working in Germany as the COO of a team to founding my own law practice and doing things I never thought that I would ever be doing. So it's definitely been a bit of a wild ride. It's been an interesting ride, and definitely some risk involved. I think that looking back on it, I ask myself all the time, like, you must have been crazy to do that kind of stuff. Like, but it worked out. So, I'm quite happy with where we are now. And on a weekly basis, my schedule, I think it's just mostly talking to teams. I think a lot of it is having to do with emerging areas, not necessarily in the gaming industry, in video games. I think esports are one thing, and I think that's kind of been played to death a little bit. I've done a lot of work recently, and all kinds of things having to do with event production, which is, I think, something that esports teams are kind of recognizing as we talk about their monetization capabilities, that they're not simply able to monetize a team in the same way that a professional sports team would be able to monetize, given all kinds of rights associated with ticket sales and broadcasting rights that they don't have. So I think we've kind of been exploring other areas and avenues for them to monetize, and that's looked like event production, that's looked like agency law, and obviously advertising law in the context of sponsorship work. But really, we've been seeing a great shift away from a simple, how do we become the New York Yankees, to how do we become a media empire? How do we become, how do we interact with this video game as a way to market our other ancillary business? And the best example of that would probably be Team Solomid, which has created a platform. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it, but it's called Blitz.gg, which is one of the largest software programs in the world, having to do with League of Legends. And it is it works with League of Legends in the context of the League of Legends client, and it doesn't really have much to do with Team Solomid as an esports team, but they certainly have some sort of interaction, given the fact that Team Solomid had its basis as a professional esports team, and now eventually helped create this platform.
No, that's great. Thank you, Harris. And I think that you've kind of previewed some of our other kind of discussion points on kind of how the industry has changed in your view. So I'm interested to kind of get back to that point on the shift of media empire thought process. Hey, Aalok, what about you?
Yeah, it's funny. I think Harris made a good point that we all legitimately love video games, like on this panel. I just finished Cyberpunk, and Dave will appreciate this. I started God of War, the old one that just got released on the PSN store for
that's one of my studios also. I support Santa Monica Studio and work on that game.
And it's a classic, even though it's only 4 years old. So I picked it up again and said, hey, it's free. I'm going to play it. Well, it's part of my membership. But I think it's important to recognize that we actually enjoy the things that we do. This isn't really, it's not really work. It feels like work, but it's not, because it's fun. It's things that we would do in our normal time. In terms of my video game experience, what happened to me was sort of just be in the right place at the right time, candidly. We had historically worked with stick and ball sports teams. And back in, gosh, I'm dating myself here a little bit, but it's maybe 2015, another partner asked, said, hey, you do fantasy sports work? And I said, yeah. He said, and we sort of had this conversation. Was like, well, that's the same thing as esports, right? And I sort of had to clarify that it's not. They're very different things because, if you're not used to this, you sort of think that they are the same. And my esports practice sort of just kind of grew from there. And it's historically been helping stick and ball teams figure out how to activate with esports and esports properties and games, because it's funny that we talked about Bryce, but I think the first time I met Bryce, he had a statistic saying that for every baseball player that dies, there's like 2 esport players. And I think that's right. I mean,
Still says it.
and look, I think this is 100% right. I mean, like the demographics support that esports and video gaming is just going to grow. And traditional sports properties have to look to these marketplaces for growth, right? And so you need outside counsel, including, all the people on this panel obviously know how to do this, but you need outside counsel that not only understands the legal issues, but really understands the business issues and the business case for those issues. So as someone who typically, is trends a little younger and still engages with these products, it became sort of a natural fit for me to sort of be that go-to point person within the firm. So video games, it can be a whole host of things. We could be talking about, one of our clients being a sports team wanting to do sort of a tournament and negotiating sort of a community license for that tournament. It could be, trying to figure out, hey, maybe there's a sports team that, maybe there's a property that should really be under our umbrella. I mean, a lot of NBA teams have 2K property teams. You see, the Cowboys at one point had Complexity under their umbrella. And a lot of sports teams continue to still have sports teams under or esports properties under their portfolio. So really where I come into play is sort of advising on, and again, what Harris has mentioned before is that there's a lot of regulatory risks in this space, where either at the state or level or, in federal law, which we talk about labor law, which is always a big part of these panels. And so it's sort of understanding those risks and helping them figure out different monetization strategies, because historically esports teams struggle to become monetized. And so now they're sort of looking at different categories and different paths to become sort of more cash flow positive. In a sense, they're not that dissimilar from traditional stick and ball teams, right? We're all trying to find different ways to sort of increase the enterprise value of the product, and then B, find cash positive solutions where we can minimize risk, because some of these areas are risky, right? If we're talking crypto, we're talking NFTs, and trying to mitigate that risk and sort of try to increase the cash position of the business. So that's typically what my experience looks like in this space. I think video game can be really broad. We could be talking about a video game, or we could talk about sort of iGaming, right? Which is sort of a video game product. It's really, really broad on a day-to-day basis.
No, that's a good clarification. Thank you, Aalok. Okay, Dave, what about you?
Yeah, thanks. So I talked a little bit about how I got into the space. So I'll just focus on my day-to-day schedule and what I actually do. Yeah. So my work kind of falls into 3 buckets. My overall job is to support the studios and be their primary legal contact for all their legal needs. And that includes all their transactions. So that mostly, for my purposes, includes like development agreements and large complex licenses, like licensing with the league and the Players Association, individual players, licensing an IP for other games. Like I also support Gran Turismo. So car licenses and licenses with tracks, things like that. The other big bucket is clearance. So I'm on that front. I'm what you might call a product counsel. So ensuring that the studio gets the guidance that they need from a legal perspective on the product throughout its life cycle. For my purposes, that includes IP counseling and clearance, rights of publicity, marketing, licensing, open source software, game economy issues, talent and union issues, and some other things. And then the third big bucket would be like project management generally. We have a big department and there are subject matter experts for each of the other kind of major subject matters in legal practice, like marketing and corporate and litigation, privacy, et cetera. So while it's my responsibility to be the primary contact and to execute on the things that I was talking about, there are a lot of other people involved, and it's my responsibility, if those other things come up, to loop in the right subject matter expert, or work with junior lawyer, or work with paralegal to make sure that the studios get their legal needs met. And in terms of like what's occupying my time, I have the ongoing studio support, which it's the amount of time I'm involved depends on the development cycle, the stage of the development cycle that we're at. But I also support, like I said, our PC and mobile groups, and those are kind of emergent, growing groups. So I'm spending a lot of time working with them on bringing some of our formerly exclusive games to PC, and then supporting, the growth of the mobile group and deals going on in mobile.
Great, thanks, Dave. Okay, Roger, what about you?
I think Aalok hit the nail on the head that we're all gamers first, and that's really how we approach our business, right, and the practice. So for me, similar story. I had grown up a gamer, went to law school hell bent on working in baseball, but that never panned out, fortunately. I had graduated law school, was externing for a criminal court judge here in the city, got a position with a commercial litigation firm in Manhattan. Wasn't for me. Still never gave up on the dream for sports. So I had parlayed some contacts I had, particularly with collegiate level athletes, to assist them in steering clear of the long arm of NCAA enforcement. And doing that, and also working with some small mom and pop startups, when I had just came upon a social media article about a dispute between an esports organization and their player, and about how nasty that was getting and spilling over into social media, and it was quite rough. But needless to say, that was very much eye-opening for me, who had only known of competitive video gaming as existing solely in Korea. I grew up playing a lot of StarCraft Brood War back in the day, and certainly knew that there was a huge competitive scene there for that game. So this was a sort of tip of the iceberg moment for me, of just saying like, all right, well, what sort of league structure is this? What sort of entities are involved? What are the various relationships involved? That led to a whole lot of research, and a whole lot of research led to networking. Networking led to one client led to five led to the whole practice. So been exclusively working in esports and gaming now since 2015. It's been quite a ride since then. Well, I say my day-to-day, part of the thing that's rough on my end is having clients literally all over the world, because I have to exist in multiple time zones. So usually starts off with breakfast with a future esports star, which is my 3-year-old son, who loves him some Rocket League, and baseball. So we're maybe not necessarily getting rid of the baseball and esports players yet, but and then just jump right in. So I'm usually on all the time. Start at 8, and by the end of the afternoon, I'll knock out all of my NA and Europe side work. And then come the evening, I'm talking to people in Australia and China, or Australia, Asia, slightly less on China, with respect to their needs. So in terms of the subject matters, I would say that I've been touching most lately. Commercial contracts has always been constant. Influencer marketing, especially during COVID, has skyrocketed across the board. So there's a ton of sponsorship work involved in that space. It looks a lot like your non-esports sponsorship work, albeit with some curveballs existing in the digital space. And also even some hybrid activations of in-person and online. Doing also a lot of M&A of late. I think we've closed 7 acquisitions in the last 7-8 months or so. Since November. still remains to be a lot of significant properties that are available for acquisition or sale. That's definitely, and I would assume with the anticipated slide as far as the global economy goes, that will definitely increase. Investment side work has been steady in terms of interest, certainly. I mean, everyone, as Aalok mentioned, teams especially are hungry for cash. So that's always been ever present. Will be interesting to see if the economy changes do affect that somewhat. I think there's also some concern over inflated valuations. There's also concern over the viability of even some entire leagues, and whether those will continue to be viable moving forward. And if, Lord knows, if one significantly sized league fails, how does that poison the well, if at all, for subsequent properties? So it's a whole lot of future proofing. I think, as Harris mentioned also, this is an industry that is not just games. So it very much likes it to adopt new tech and how it can implement that in new and exciting ways, whether it be an activation form or as a diversification revenue stream, or even just as a differentiator between themselves and their competition. So there's a lot of emerging tech, even just research, that has to go on to understanding these new products and how they can be implemented and the relevant risks involved.
No, that's great. Thanks, Roger. Well, so I guess for road mapping purposes for our panelists and for our audience here, I think what I'm going to try to get us into now is what it's like working in the industry. What's the most challenging aspect of it? What's the most fun? And, how kind of the trends that you've seen in the industry, since you've all been a part of it. And then we'll kind of transition to some of the hot topics that you guys are seeing. As you guys all know, I've got some that I've kind of shared with the panelists already, but some that may come up kind of naturally. Again, if anybody has any questions in the meantime, feel free to ask them. But I guess getting back to what I was mentioning, working in this industry, you've all talked about kind of your origins being gamers. I guess what is kind of the most fun aspect of it, and maybe what's the most challenging for somebody that may not understand what it's like. And this one, I just want to kind of throw it open and see if anybody, wants to respond when they will.
I'll take it, I guess. Sure, the most fun thing. Well, I'll tell you what the most rewarding thing for me was, since we're at an SLA thing, SLA panel. I am a huge New York Islanders fan. I mean, I bleed blue and orange. Mets, I know Roger's a big Mets fan. My grandfather was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan. So the Mets are still there for me, but it's always been about the New York Islanders. It's been a lot of fun getting to, one of the most rewarding things for me was I got to work with the New York Islanders and help them build out their esports properties. And that was, something that I, as a kid, watching Pierre Turgeon come down, center ice against the New York Rangers, that was something I probably couldn't have even dreamed of doing. And getting to actually associate myself with that team was definitely one of the more rewarding things. It was kind of okay, this is something I've thought about since 30 years ago or something like that. It was definitely a lot. It was a pinch me kind of moment, which is fun. In terms of actual fun things, I can remember being in this industry. My team that I worked with in 2016 went to the World Championships for League of Legends that year. So we actually ended up finishing third in the world, and we were the best Western team in the entire world. We sold out Madison Square Garden. That was a lot of fun. It was fun to kind of be involved in that management aspect of the team, where you're putting together a roster, you're finding sponsorship deals, you're helping fund the team. And then, kind of going with them to South Korea to boot camp, going with them to Poland to see the tournaments. That was definitely a lot of fun. That's a highlight. And then I can remember kind of right before that semifinal game started for League of Legends in 2016. I remember just the entire crowd, Madison Square Garden, was going crazy for us. That was definitely a feeling I don't think I'll ever have again. And then on a legal basis, I think that it's exploring new things. If you would have told me, I came up with a background that, I was trained as a corporate attorney at a law firm. If you'd have told me that there was a point where I was doing conscription work for one of my Greek players on that team in 2016, just to see if he was going to be conscripted into the Greek military. I've done it for Korean military too. It's unique problems like that. In the United States, I've done things like EB-1A visas, which I didn't think I was going to be doing. I've done things like, I feel like, to be blunt, I've done more agency work than I ever anticipated I would ever be doing. And when I say that, Roger brought up a good point with respect to influencer marketing in the space right now. It's huge. Team sponsorships has always been huge, particularly in sports as well. And that's nothing really too new. Professional sports teams generate roughly 20% of their revenues from, commercial sponsorships, right? So it's not too different from, when I work on the team side for a company like, Evil Geniuses or Complexity, like doing a sponsorship deal is not too different from doing a sponsorship deal that you might otherwise do in professional sports. But then you start seeing all these teams kind of branch out into new avenues. They're creating content creation teams. And what does that mean? They're not necessarily participating in a professional esport. They're just saying, oh, these people play this video game and they stream on Twitch and they get hundreds of thousands of viewed hours. Like, what if we have them wear our stuff and promote our sponsors? Like, okay, like when do we start crossing that line into agency law? Like, when do we start acting as a talent agent? Like, what does that look like? So that's, emerging areas like that. We do all kinds of event production. And really, I think the most fun, I talked about, fun in the sense of like, I didn't think I'd be doing that kind of thing a couple of years ago. I think it's been steering the ship to some degree. I think kind of figuring out how to make this industry work for everyone involved. And as Roger brought up, we're looking at I think there's going to be a consolidation in the marketplace right now for esports teams. It's oversaturated. The revenues aren't necessarily there to justify a simple esports team. And I think I've been saying that for a while. The reasons are simple. They're due to IP ownership rights having to do with a game developer, having to do with the fact that they don't generate, the broadcasting rights absent some sort of a revenue share agreement, which may or may not be worked out depending on the league structure you're in. And then you have all kinds of issues with the type of the media distribution. But that aside, there needs to be some way to make this ship run. We need to have some sort of influx of cash. And a lot of these teams have been realizing that it's not there. So kind of playing that role where we're scouting this terrain out has looked for me like something as simple as, like I said, I'm a huge World of Warcraft fan, right? I've been playing World of Warcraft since 2004. I started a club in 2004 at my high school to play World of Warcraft. And all my best friends were in that club. And I got to work with the #1 World of Warcraft team in the entire world to put on an event production for a race to be the first guild, as they call themselves, in the entire world to complete the latest boss that was distributed by Blizzard Entertainment. And we turned this into an event production. We were selling tickets. We're doing sponsorships for this kind of stuff. Anything you could possibly imagine. And then it turns into, it's not so much like an esports team at that point. Well, sure, you need the employment contracts to have the players. You need everything associated with that. There's no league in a sense. It's more grassroots. But being able to kind of innovate in that way, it was really special. And then the other thing I think, which is also a really big thing for me, and since this is more of a video game panel, this has been, I also had the opportunity to work with the other game that I find really near and dear to my heart is Super Smash Bros. Melee. I've played that game forever, and I've had the opportunity to work with a man who helped develop a modding system, I guess I would call it, called Slippy.gg, which enables online play of Super Smash Bros. Melee, which was actually originally a game that was developed for couch play, LAN play. And this game has, over the past 20 years, been an incredibly popular game. It has one of the most longevities of any game I can remember. And being able to kind of be associated with that project was also really special to me.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for those examples, Harris. Okay, Dave, Roger, Aalok, any other thoughts on that? Again, kind of either things that have been kind of rewarding in this industry or challenges, or anything in between.
I'm ready to hop into some of the topics. I think that'd be fun because I think some of the things I want to talk about, or I'm sure that Roger talk about, probably relate to some of the issues that some of the panelists are interested in, or participants.
Sure. Well, I guess getting to that then, Aalok, if you want to kind of kick us off, have you kind of noticed any trends or kind of hot topics in the industry that you think that, people that are attending this panel should know about, that should be paying attention to?
Yeah, it's funny because last year, I think Harris noted last year that we did this panel and it was on betting. And I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon, right? As more and more states continue to roll out regulations on wagering. And again, esports and video games are unique because they attract a different crowd. Now the question is, how do you monetize that crowd? And gaming, betting is one of those areas. So there's going to be more and more challenges as these states continue to roll out and pass sports wagering laws, or and that's also a point, right? Is esports a sport, and does it fall under the umbrella that the state legislature has sort of indicated? So that's one area that's where I think is really exploding, and I think that will continue to grow. I think we're at like 30, I don't know, 30, somewhere in the low 30s in the number of states that have passed sports betting laws. The other area that I think is really interesting is sort of what people are doing with crypto or NFTs or Web3 principles. Those are areas that are continuing to grow, and those are really new areas. And this goes back to what I think is rewarding and hard at the same time. You don't want to be that lawyer that just says no because you don't know what's going on, because some of this stuff is just so cutting edge, and I'm like having to read like subreddits on like, what is this? And it's kind of weird to go to a subreddit to get legal advice, but some of this stuff is so like nuanced and new. I'm like, I don't know what this is, and I can't give you legal advice unless I know how it functions, or like what are you trying to get at? And it's always funny because when you work with in-house counsel that's also on the gaming side, they're also lost too. They're like, my business units are saying this, I have no idea what this is. Have you heard of it? And so that is actually the most rewarding, fun part, because I'm learning and it's educational, but at the same time, it's like terrifying because you're being asked to give advice on a lot of these new areas where, you're trying to assess risk in this regulatory environment that's just moving like on a daily basis, right? I remember, 3 months ago or 2 months ago, there was that executive order on, how to handle crypto transactions from the president. And we're sort of like thinking, okay, what does this executive order mean in the sports realm, right? I mean, it's not just crypto or DeFi, it's affecting everything. And so that is the most rewarding part, but it's also the hardest part in my experience. And I think, those two sort of buckets are where I'm seeing a lot of growth.
No, that's well said, Aalok. Okay, Roger or Dave, any thoughts on, either kind of what we talked about, a couple minutes ago, rewarding aspects of the industry or challenging, and or, what Aalok mentioned about, kind of the wagering aspect, or kind of, the increasing incorporation of crypto and Web3 and NFTs and all those things in the industry?
Yeah, specifically with respect to the crypto and Web3 NFT side of things, something that I think is really fascinating is the concept of the play to earn or play and earn game. The fact that you can essentially monetize your own individual gameplay to potentially make a living and live well. That to me is fascinating. It's been the subject of many hours of subreddit reading, as Aalok mentioned. It's really cool. The ability to then, take that on a micro level and have individuals that are earning their own revenue doing so, but then, how can that scale up? How can you take that and turn that into a larger or broader esports project, like we've seen with Riot and League of Legends, or like we've seen with, any of these other leagues. And the interesting ability that, the interesting monetization aspect that brings to that table, and then how that can then translate into how you utilize and or distribute prize money, or can you do that even on a small scale, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis? Do you need the big Madison Square Garden events? How do you then put an event around that? What does that production look like? So in so many ways, to me, that play to earn game concept, which is still fairly young, is really fascinating for the future of what could be esports, or at least as a segment of it. It certainly won't replace or even take a significant chunk out of the existing products that are already there. To Alok's point with respect to betting, 100% going to keep increasing, especially as sports betting continues to roll out across the states. You're seeing a lot of states lumping esports into that as just basically treating it as any other sport, which is frankly the easy way to do it. You don't have to, there are, of course, concerns on the legislature side that esports is kids playing games. But certainly anyone willing to listen to the data can quickly learn that that's not the case. So that will continue both domestically and globally. I know Asia in particular is really looking at how, if at all, it can include esports and competitive gaming into its existing sports betting infrastructure, and their system is certainly more fragmented than we have here. As far as things that are rewarding and challenging, one of the biggest challenges is also the most fun, is the fact that this is all new water, right? Like, this is all completely new territory for so many of these things. And even though many of the issues that we may face in practice on a day-to-day basis may look or sound or be similar to certainly legal issues that have pre-existed esports in other contexts, the application is certainly different. The blend and the variety of how these issues present themselves is different. So in that way, as I always tell my interns, it's law school finals every day, right? It's always getting hit with something new. Now, that type of mental gymnastics I find fun. As far as the most rewarding side of things is, I think for me, that's giving back. Certainly in recognizing that I'm in a privileged position, having developed my practice across the last 8 years now in this space, and having been offered the opportunity to teach on the legal and business issues of esports at Marquette Law, or to help train the next batch of esports lawyers behind us, or certainly to serve as on the board of directors at Latinx in Gaming, and helping to elevate the Latino community that exists in and around games, and help certainly get more involved in that space, which is prototypically older white males. So for me, I'm very big on community, and as is esports. Right? Esports was simply a tournament structure and a monetization on top of an existing community. I'm big on community and big on giving back. So certainly that is being able to do so and being in a position to do so is by far the most rewarding aspect of my career.
Yeah, it's great perspective. Thanks, Roger. And it's kind of funny, the mental gymnastics that you're talking about and kind of the everyday law school final exam, right? That actually dovetails pretty nicely with kind of the points that Aalok mentioned, right, about just being fast-paced and kind of the challenges that come with being in this industry. Dave, any thoughts on any of those topics that we just discussed?
Sure. Yeah, I'll kind of dovetail on some of that and mention some other trends and hot topics in the industry.
Right.
So there's all of the stuff that everybody mentioned. In addition to that, the development of UGC-based games and platforms, I think, has been a huge trend over the last 5-10 years, and that dovetails also with the application of blockchain technology into gaming. The ability for creators to create content, create value, and to extract that value from the game, and to bring that value from one experience to another. And I'm not sure if we're there yet, but blockchain technology definitely has the potential to assist in that. And then there are all the legal issues that flow from that. The financial regulatory issues, the contract issues, intellectual property issues, and enforcement around all of that stuff, especially with respect to blockchain, and an immutable ledger that may not allow you to unwind things from a technological standpoint. Like, how do we deal with enforcement in that context? Also, this is a little bit longer tail, but the development of live services games, and sort of how the migration of mobile mechanics and monetization from mobile to console and PC, in terms of use of live services, content drops, loot boxes, and how that dovetails with gambling laws, and also betting on games, and the distinction between games of chance and games of skill. And then from an industry perspective, the discussion about consolidation and investment has been a huge impact, right? We've had big players investing and acquiring companies across the industry, and how that investment affects the way that independent developers can approach deals, can have their own creative control, and can rebalance the sort of power dynamic in a negotiation when there's new players in that circle, which include venture capital and more traditional finance groups that are less interested in strategic investment and more interested in just being involved in from a revenue perspective. So I think those have had kind of the biggest impacts in terms of the industry growth and development, and especially indie developers.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that, Dave, because I'm a litigator, and one of the topics, a few of the topics I wanted to raise with you guys that I see, increasingly in litigation, or at least complaints and class action complaints, is on loot boxes and on disaffirmation and issues related to minors generally, and also NIL and publicity rights, right? Like, to go back to Aalok's, one of his very first points, right? Kind of like, there's actually a lot more perhaps similarities between this and stick and ball sports that we may realize, and that certainly applies to some of these types of topics. So any of those three topics, you don't necessarily have to touch the litigation side of it, but any thoughts on any of those three topics generally in this space?
Well, there's a lot there. I'll just mention
right.
some things briefly. I mean, rights of publicity, name, image, and likeness is more and more relevant, especially in console and PC gaming, where the resolution is extremely high, and characters are increasingly based on the actor's likeness that plays them, and that includes issues around the scope of the agreement that you create with the actor, and how that impacts your downstream exploitation rights for the character, your marketing rights for the character, and potential union issues that go along with employing actors that are union members and having union projects. In terms of engaging minors, I think that the people who are more heavily involved in esports here probably encounter this a little bit more, but I encounter it occasionally, and there's the disaffirmation issue, which can be overcome. There's a strategic element to it in terms of you can have a parent or guardian sign in addition to the minor, but that doesn't bind the minor to the contract. It's just it's kind of like a guarantee, sort of. There's the Coogan Act requirements that require certain compliance, education and payment compliance requirements related to engaging minors. And then if you want to make sure that the minor can't disaffirm the contract, there's a judicial process of approval of the contract to ensure that can happen. In terms of loot boxes, I mean, it's an interesting issue for Counsel, because I think it's very much about not just gambling. I think gambling is its own thing, but also how the community feels about the way that companies monetize games. In free-to-play games, it seems like it's generally accepted. Companies need to be able to get paid for their work. Less accepted in games where people are paying at the front end. And so for games that people are paying at the front end, you really have to show that there's a value associated with that additional monetization mechanic. And it's all about design, and it's all about making sure that value is felt by the players, in addition to the regulatory aspect of it.
Dave, it's interesting. Oh, sorry, Harris, I'll get to you 1 second. I was just going to say, it's interesting, kind of building off your NIL point, right? Kind of watching from afar, as we've seen in the industry, kind of the reemergence of EA Sports football, what used to be known as NCAA football, and kind of the negotiations that will come, right, on kind of which universities will be participating, which won't, how those licenses will work, and all the things that go into the NIL. So sorry, Peskin, Harris, what were you gonna say?
I haven't been called Peskin in a long time. It's okay. No, I was just going to touch on, I think that those three are really super interesting points. And I mean, we're limited on time. I mean, you can literally make a panel out of any of those three issues. And as Aalok said last year, we spoke a lot about loot boxes and in particular where we thought that was going with the industry. I think we had a conversation about Mason v. Machine Zone, which I believe was like a Maryland case that discussed whether or not usage of in-game gold could account to some sort of money, which is a required element of gambling. And then I think we countered that. I think the case was Cater v. Churchill Downs, which was the complete opposite, which said that in-game gold can actually serve as some sort of compensation, which is one of the requisite elements of illegal gambling. But I think that really touching on the name and the NIL stuff is really kind of more to do, in my opinion, with the emergence of video games. And as Dave mentioned, it becomes more and more of an issue as technology increases. I view it almost as like, I remember there's a Lindsay Lohan case about this at one point, but the way I view it actually is that as these in-game avatars actually begin to resemble our personas, even more than they probably already do, because there's still a bit of a ways to go. What kind of vital publicity issues does that bring? What happens if one of these in-game personas is a derivative or otherwise looks exactly like me and is otherwise monetized by the game developer in some form of advertising, right? Which is, they're commercially exploiting my avatar at that point, or myself, because it looks exactly like me. I mean, obviously you would point to the EULAs and all kinds of the contractual agreements that you have, but then you have issues like who's contracting. Is it a contract of adhesion? Something that was discussed in the case called Bragg v. Linden Labs, where they basically said that these kinds of EULAs might be unconscionable. So I think that these are all really interesting issues. And I think as we kind of approach that from more of a legalistic perspective, it actually brings up another interesting issue in the context of NIL and ownership generally of avatars in these games. And we haven't, I don't think this has been an issue yet, or I haven't seen too much literature on it. I've read a little bit about it, but it gets to a point where I begin to consider, and I'm sure Dave won't like me saying this, who actually owns the in-game creation of, let's say, for example, there's infinite possibilities for me to create an in-game avatar in some sort of a game. Is that a creative work that I would be performing there? Is that not akin to me using Microsoft Paint or Photoshop to kind of generate my own in-game avatar, which should then be copyrightable by myself? But how does that exist with the existing copyright protections that are granted to the game developers? Where's the line where you differentiate between, okay, I use Microsoft Word and I use Microsoft Paint seemingly on a daily basis. They provide some sort of a service to me. They provide tools for me to create my own copyrightable expressions. But and maybe that's the case for games with worse resolution and worse options in terms of creation of these in-game avatars. But is there a point in which this actual in-game IP can be owned by the creator of the game itself? And that's a question I think we're going to need to have. And just to bring it back to Bragg v. Linden Lab, that was actually a game called Second Life back in 2006, which actually conferred virtual ownership of property in those games to the players themselves. And I think that is an issue we will see increasing in the video game realm. I'm not sure we're there yet, but I think that it's going to continue to rear its head.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point, Harris, that I have not considered. But I don't know if Dave has thoughts. He probably doesn't want to share them if he does live right now.
I have the luxury of speaking, like he might not.
Just briefly, I do think that is a super interesting issue. I think that copyright law addresses it to a certain extent in terms of ownership upon creation. And then the question is, how do you handle that from a contract standpoint in terms of service in the game? Does the company take the position that they own it, or do they just take a license to exploit it? Those are the very high level ways of looking at that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, Roger, any other thoughts?
Yeah, to take name, image, and likeness issues in a different direction. I mean, certainly in the last few years, we've seen collegiate athletes have the ability to exploit their name, image, and likeness commercially. And one of the ways that I think we're starting to see that come to fruition on a small scale is by starting to create and develop their own brands while in college through content creation, whether it be through streaming on Twitch, through YouTube, through Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, etc. You're starting to come up with these you're starting to raise these brand issues and face these same issues that any professional athlete has in that context, and at that earlier stage now than we were used to. So, in those instances, if you have, let's say, there's limited authorization in terms of like agent representation with NIL issues, but, certainly there's no real preclusion towards video game sponsorships, whether it be through activating on Twitch, activating on YouTube, TikTok, etc., and participating in this industry while for a brand building exercise, while still participating outside of this industry from a athletic career exercise. So I think the removal of some of those issues with respect to name, image, and likeness prohibitions on the at the collegiate level has now allowed for college athletes to really serve in this sort of hybrid role and stretch across both industries to monetize in one, brand build in one, and then essentially port that brand to their athletic career.
That's a great point. Well, we are at the hour mark. I want to thank our panelists. A really terrific discussion. I want, if you don't mind, maybe each of you could just give kind of some parting words. I will point out there's a good question here from one of our audience members asking what are the best ways to keep up to date on the legal issues in esports and video game industries. So if you guys have any parting words in general on what we've discussed or in particular for that question, I'd appreciate it. So Harris, you want to start? Oh, I think you're muted again.
Sorry. Yeah, I'd say follow my.
No worries.
That's probably not the greatest idea. No, I think if you're looking to stay up to date, I participate alongside Adam Gertz, who is also a director of the EBA. We have a podcast that we put out on legal issues associated with the video game and esports issues. Definitely, that's one way. I think that also just there's a whole bunch of people that write academically on this stuff. Journals that the EBA puts out, as well as other academic writings. I think the SLA has put out as well. I think really just doing your diligence and knowing the people on this panel as well as other people in the space that are talking about these issues are a fantastic way to keep up to date on this kind of stuff. In terms of reaching out to me, feel free to shoot me a LinkedIn, shoot me a Twitter request or whatever. And always happy to chat these issues. And thank you for having me to the SLA.
Great. Okay, Dave, Aalok, Roger, any parting thoughts?
I would just say that, we covered a lot of ground here, and each of the things that were brought up could be their own,
Sure.
day-long sort of series of panels. So yeah, doing the diligence, the things that Harris mentioned, there are organizations that focus on different aspects of gaming law. There's lots of publications. I think articles are good in terms of like legal articles and following the legal issues. There's also just reading the news and reading through the technology section of like Google News or something similar is helpful in terms of industry trends, and then kind of going down the path of what legal issues are associated with that.
Great, thanks. All right, Aalok, Roger, any parting thoughts?
Yeah, go ahead, Roger.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, the esports bar does a really good job every year of putting out their journal, and they do an annual conference at some point. I don't know if Harris probably haven't been able to do one with COVID.
We haven't been able to do an annual one, but we will be doing one later in the year this year.
Yeah, so that's a great opportunity. The Sports Lawyers Association always puts good content out. I think the Video Game Bar Association just had their conference within the last month or so. So there's some really good organizations out there that you can look to join and be a part of it. Should be able to give you sort of that educational piece that you might not be getting from some of your traditional legal conferences.
Great point, Aalok. All right, Roger, last word.
So 2 tips with respect to staying on top of legal issues in the space. One, I would not underestimate Twitter in terms of the attorneys that are active in the space. They're all good follows. Obviously, you're not going to get in-depth legal analysis because it's Twitter, but nonetheless, you'll get some clues in on some of the issues that are going on and some of the topics that are being faced. On top of that, I would say Esports Observer is a good follow from a business end. I know they're in conjunction with Sports Business Journal as well. So, and many of you are, I'm sure, already readers of that. So certainly an easy way to stay on top of the business side, because I think, as Aalok mentioned, you really need to be keyed into the business of esports in order to really be able to determine viable legal solutions. They become, I think the legal issues start becoming very apparent the more you learn and the more you pour into the various business issues involved. So, you know, certainly would encourage you to stay on top of the business stuff. But yeah, otherwise, in terms of getting in contact, I'm Roger at esports.law. Easy enough to reach me, and I'm sure other panelists are happy to speak with you all as well.
Yeah, well said. All right, Roger, Harris, Dave, Aalok, thanks so much for a great discussion today, and hope everybody has a nice day, and I guess we'll talk soon. See ya.
Thank you.
Thanks.